My name is Sierra Walker, and at 32 I never expected to be at the center of a corporate scandal. There I was, sipping champagne at an exclusive board dinner, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was clear: leave. Now. Don't tell anyone. My hands trembled as I excused myself, feigning illness. 15 minutes after I drove away, federal agents stormed our offices. Sometimes doing the right thing comes at a price you never anticipated paying. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if corporate whistleblowing stories revealing the dark underbelly of business intrigue you. I graduated with a finance degree from University of Pennsylvania and later earned my MBA from Northwestern, always dreaming of making it big in the corporate world. 3 years ago, that dream seemed to come true when I landed a position as a senior financial analyst at Horizon Innovations, a tech company that was rapidly becoming the darling of Wall Street. The sleek headquarters in downtown Chicago, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and state-of-the-art facilities, initially felt like the perfect workplace. Everyone appeared motivated, friendly, and committed to the company's mission of transforming digital solutions for a better tomorrow. The competitive salary, generous benefits, and promises of rapid advancement made it seem like I'd hit the jackpot. Marcus Reynolds, our CEO, was something of a legend in the industry. Tall and imposing, with perfectly tailored suits and a commanding presence, he had a reputation for turning struggling companies into gold mines. When he spoke at company-wide meetings, his charisma was undeniable. He knew how to inspire with grand visions of growth and innovation. Yet beneath that polished exterior, there was something unsettling about him. His smile never quite reached his eyes, and those who questioned his decisions often found themselves sidelined or out of a job entirely. During my onboarding process, the employment contract I received seemed standard until I reached a peculiarly detailed whistleblower clause. It stated that any employee who identified potential wrongdoing was obligated to report it through proper channels with specific protection guarantees that seemed excessive. The legal jargon was dense, but I remember Thomas Wright, our head of legal, emphasizing this section. Marcus insists on this clause, Thomas explained, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He believes in absolute transparency and wants to ensure anyone who spots irregularities can come forward without fear. At the time, I thought it demonstrated strong ethical standards. I couldn't have been more wrong. My job involved analyzing financial data, preparing reports, and identifying trends to help guide company decisions. I worked closely with Janet Bailey, our CFO, a woman in her 50s with a sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude who became something of a mentor to me. She had decades of experience and seemed genuinely interested in helping me navigate corporate politics. Keep your head down and your eyes open. Sierra, she advised me once over coffee, not everything is as it appears in this business. Then there was Derek Morris, Vice President of Operations, a man who exuded arrogance and seemed to materialize at my desk whenever I was reviewing sensitive financial documents. His forced casualness never masked the intensity with which he scrutinized my work. "Just checking in on your progress," he'd say, leaning too close. "Marcus likes to stay informed about the numbers." Allison Park, Marcus's executive assistant, managed his fortress-like schedule and seemed fiercely loyal to him. Petite, with an immaculate appearance, she controlled access to the CEO with an iron grip disguised by a sweet smile. Nothing reached Marcus without passing through Allison first. The first 6 months were exhilarating as Horizon continued its meteoric rise. Our stock price doubled. We acquired 3 smaller competitors, and the press hailed Marcus as a visionary leader. I was proud to be part of such a successful enterprise, even if the hours were brutal and the pressure intense. Then came the first signs that something wasn't right. While preparing the quarterly financial report, I noticed discrepancies between the raw data and the final numbers presented to investors. Revenue figures seemed inflated by subtle adjustments across multiple departments. When I mentioned this to my immediate supervisor, he dismissed my concerns. "Accounting uses allocation methods you might not be familiar with," he said dismissively. "Focus on your analytics and leave the reporting to them." As quarters passed, the tension between departments grew palpable. Marketing complained about unrealistic targets, while sales boasted of record-breaking results that never seemed to fully materialize in the actual revenue. Meanwhile, our reported profit margins mysteriously increased quarter after quarter, defying industry standards and economic realities. My position allowed me glimpses into various financial streams, but never the complete picture. It felt like looking at a puzzle with deliberate pieces missing. The pressure to maintain our perfect financial image for investors became all-consuming. Executives spoke constantly about meeting expectations and maintaining market confidence, with an intensity that bordered on obsession. By my second year, the company culture had shifted dramatically. People worked in anxious silence, afraid to ask questions or challenge directives from above. Turnover increased as talented people left without explanation. Those who remained walked on eggshells, especially around Marcus and his inner circle. What I didn't realize then was that I was already standing at the edge of a massive corporate fraud scheme, and my next discovery would push me right into its center. It was a Tuesday night in October when everything changed. The office had emptied hours earlier, but I remained working on projections for an upcoming investor presentation. The quiet after-hours atmosphere usually helped me focus, with only the gentle hum of the HVAC system keeping me company. At around 10:30, I requested additional data from our secure financial server to complete my analysis. What arrived wasn't what I expected. Instead of the summarized quarterly report, someone had accidentally sent the raw transaction files, including subsidiary account activities that analysts at my level rarely accessed. The first discrepancy jumped out immediately. A transfer of $7 million to overseas development partners appeared in the raw data, but was categorized differently in the official reports. Rather than being marked as an expense, it had somehow transformed into an asset acquisition in the final documentation. "This has to be a filing error," I muttered to myself, rubbing my tired eyes. I cross-referenced other transactions and found more inconsistencies. Research and development costs appeared significantly lower in official reports than in internal documentation. Revenue from certain clients was recorded before contracts were actually signed. The patterns were subtle but unmistakable once I started looking for them. The next morning, I cautiously mentioned the inconsistencies to Ryan, a fellow analyst I trusted. "I found some weird numbers in the quarterly report," I said casually as we waited for coffee in the break room. His reaction surprised me. Rather than showing curiosity, he glanced nervously around the room. "Be careful what questions you ask, Sierra," he whispered. "Amy, in accounting, started poking around last month and suddenly got transferred to our Minneapolis office. Just saying." His warning only heightened my concern. That evening I stayed late again this time, deliberately searching for similar patterns in previous quarters. The discrepancies weren't isolated incidents, but part of a systematic approach spanning at least 2 years. The more I dug, the worse it looked. Using my finance background, I traced several mysterious fund transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and shell companies with vague purposes. All told, it appeared that nearly $40 million had been misrepresented or improperly allocated. This wasn't just creative accounting. It looked like deliberate fraud designed to artificially inflate our performance and stock value. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding as I grasped the magnitude of what I'd discovered. Horizon's miraculous growth story, which had made millionaires of its executives through stock options, appeared to be built on fabricated numbers. The responsible thing would be to report my findings immediately. But to whom? The compliance department reported directly to Marcus. The board consisted largely of his longtime associates. Going public without absolute proof would be career suicide and potentially expose me to legal liability. I made a decision that night to document everything meticulously. I created encrypted files with screenshots, transaction records, and my analysis, storing them both in a secure cloud account and on a flash drive I kept with me at all times. If I was going to take on a powerful CEO and potentially his entire executive team, I needed irrefutable evidence. Over the next week, my anxiety escalated as I continued my regular duties while secretly gathering more information. I researched whistleblower protections and corporate fraud cases, learning that even with legal protections, many who exposed wrongdoing faced retaliation, blacklisting, and years of legal battles. The office began to feel hostile as my paranoia grew. Was it my imagination, or were people watching me more closely? IT announced a routine security update that required monitoring of data access patterns. Derek began appearing at meetings where he normally wouldn't attend, asking pointed questions about financial reporting methods. The approaching quarterly report deadline increased pressure throughout the company. Marcus held a tense all-hands meeting where he emphasized the importance of meeting projections. "We've created exceptionally high expectations in the market," he said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Failing to meet those expectations is not an option. I trust everyone understands what's at stake." The threat beneath his words was unmistakable. When his eyes briefly locked with mine, a chill ran down my spine. Did he know I had been investigating? Later that week, I had my first direct confrontation related to the numbers. Gabriel, the accounting manager, questioned why I had requested certain raw data files. "Those reports aren't necessary for your analysis work," he said, leaning against my cubicle wall with forced casualness. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Just being thorough," I replied, maintaining a neutral expression despite my racing heart. The executive summary seemed to be missing some details I needed. He studied me for an uncomfortable moment. "Next time, come to me directly instead of going through the system. Some of those files contain sensitive information that could be misinterpreted without proper context." As he walked away, the message was clear: someone had noticed my digging and wasn't happy about it. That night, I added another layer of encryption to my evidence files and began seriously considering my next step. The fraud was ongoing, potentially growing larger with each quarter. If Horizon collapsed under regulatory scrutiny, thousands of employees and investors would suffer. The longer I waited, the worse the eventual fallout would be. But I also knew that once I took definitive action, my life would never be the same. The weight of knowledge pressed down on me like a physical burden. Each morning I'd stare at my reflection while getting ready for work, questioning whether this was the day I should speak up. The ethical choice seemed clear, but the potential consequences loomed large. My career reputation, financial stability, and possibly even personal safety hung in the balance. I decided to test the waters, by approaching Janet, our CFO. If anyone could help navigate this situation ethically, it would be her. I carefully prepared a presentation of hypothetical accounting scenarios that mirrored the actual discrepancies without directly pointing to specific transactions. We met in her office, a minimalist space with spectacular views of the Chicago skyline. Janet listened attentively as I explained my theoretical concerns about how certain accounting practices could potentially misrepresent company performance. "These are interesting scenarios, Sierra," she said when I finished. Her normally confident demeanor seemed strained, and she repeatedly glanced toward her closed door. "But you should be careful about pursuing these kinds of academic exercises." She lowered her voice. "The financial world has many gray areas. Sometimes decisions are made at levels where the broader strategy isn't visible to everyone. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Her warning was subtle but unmistakable. Either she was complicit or she was afraid. Neither possibility offered me any comfort. That night I called my former college roommate Sophia, now a financial compliance officer at a large bank in New York. Without revealing specifics, I described the situation and asked for advice. "If what you're seeing is what I think you're seeing," she said gravely, "you need to be extremely careful. I've watched careers destroyed over less. Document everything, protect yourself first, and consider speaking with a lawyer before making any moves." She then told me about James Harrington, a whistleblower, who had exposed fraud at a pharmaceutical company 5 years earlier. He did everything right, had rock-solid evidence, followed all proper channels. Today he drives for a rideshare company because no one in the industry will touch him. The company settled with regulators for a fine that amounted to 2 weeks of profit, and life went on for everyone except James. Sleep became a luxury I rarely enjoyed. Night after night I lay awake replaying scenarios in my mind, searching for a path forward that wouldn't destroy everything I'd worked for. My health began to suffer. I lost weight, developed persistent headaches, and jumped at every unexpected noise. About 2 weeks after my conversation with Janet, Derek cornered me in the parking garage after work. The concrete structure was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across his face. "Marcus asked me to check in with you," he said, standing uncomfortably close. "He's concerned you might be confused about certain company matters." "I'm not sure what you mean," I replied, clutching my purse where the flash drive with evidence was stored. "Let me be direct. Your access logs show you've been looking at files outside your department. Some might consider that corporate espionage." His tone remained conversational, but the threat was clear. "Marcus values loyalty above all else. Remember that before you do anything impulsive." As he walked away, I leaned against my car, legs weak with fear. They were watching me closely now. My window for action was closing quickly. I decided to try the company's anonymous compliance hotline, established specifically for reporting ethical concerns. 3 days after submitting a detailed report through the system, I received a curt email from Human Resources requesting a meeting to discuss workplace satisfaction and role alignment. The supposedly anonymous system had either identified me or my report had been flagged for suppression. I canceled the meeting, claiming illness, buying myself time to consider my next move. That same week I discovered my access to certain financial servers had been restricted. Meetings I normally attended were abruptly rescheduled without notifying me. Colleagues who had been friendly began avoiding me in the hallways. The isolation tactics were subtle but effective. While retrieving documents from the printer, I overheard a conversation between Marcus and a board member in a nearby conference room. The door had been left slightly ajar, their voices carrying more than they realized. "The SEC has been asking questions about the Meridian acquisition," the board member said, his voice concerned. "Let them ask," Marcus replied confidently. "Everything is structured to withstand scrutiny. As long as everyone stays on script, there's nothing to worry about. And if someone deviates from the script—" Marcus's laugh was chilling. "That won't happen. Everyone has too much to lose." That conversation confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't just aggressive accounting or isolated misrepresentations. It was a deliberate, coordinated fraud with the CEO at its center. I needed to act, but I also needed to protect myself. I spent the weekend researching external reporting options. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, had a whistleblower program that offered confidentiality and potential financial rewards. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, investigated corporate fraud cases that crossed certain thresholds. Either option meant crossing a point of no return. I prepared detailed documentation, organized chronologically and by category of potential violation. I included an executive summary that a non-financial person could understand, highlighting the most egregious examples of fraud. If I was going to put everything on the line, my evidence needed to be impeccable. As I compiled the final package, a plan began forming in my mind. I would need timing, luck, and courage to see it through. Little did I know that events were already in motion that would change everything. The invitation arrived in my inbox on a Wednesday morning. "Your presence is requested at the quarterly board and executive dinner Friday at 7 p.m. La Maison Rouge." I stared at the message in confusion. These exclusive events were typically reserved for C-suite executives and board members, not mid-level analysts like me. Allison followed up with a phone call an hour later. "Marcus specifically requested your attendance," she explained, with unusual warmth. "He's been impressed with your financial models for the upcoming investor presentation." Warning bells rang in my head. After weeks of subtle exclusion and surveillance, this sudden elevation made no sense unless they were planning something. Still, refusing would only increase suspicion. I had to attend and remain vigilant. La Maison Rouge was Chicago's most exclusive French restaurant, where reservations were typically booked months in advance, and a typical dinner cost more than most people's weekly salary. I spent Thursday evening selecting a conservative navy blue dress and reviewing potential questions about my work that might come up. I also made sure the secure flash drive with my evidence was safely stored in a waterproof inner pocket of my handbag. Friday evening arrived with an unseasonable thunderstorm that seemed to mirror my internal turmoil. The restaurant's mahogany and crimson interior exuded old-world luxury, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over impeccably set tables. A private room had been reserved for our party, with a massive oval table dominating the space. Marcus stood greeting guests at the entrance, unnervingly charismatic, in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His handshake was firm as he welcomed me. "Sierra, so glad you could join us. Your financial insights have been invaluable this quarter." I smiled and thanked him, hyper-aware of the falseness in his warm reception. The seating arrangement confirmed my suspicions that this invitation was no honor. I was placed directly across from Marcus, where he could observe my every reaction throughout the meal. The dinner began with light conversation about market conditions and competitor activities. Premium wines flowed freely as servers presented course after exquisite course. I took minimal sips from my glass, needing to maintain absolute clarity. Halfway through the meal, Marcus clinked his glass for attention. Before we moved to dessert, I wanted to share some exciting news with our inner circle first. The room fell silent as he outlined plans for a major merger with Teleron Systems, a West Coast tech company that would reportedly double Horizon's market share. The deal was predicated on our strong financial performance and stock value, both of which I knew were artificially inflated by fraud. The final papers will be signed next week, Marcus announced proudly. This will be transformative for Horizon and extremely lucrative for everyone in this room. As board members raised glasses in celebration, I noticed subtle glances between Marcus and 3 specific board members. The unspoken communication suggested they shared information others weren't privy to. I excused myself to visit the restroom, needing a moment to process what I'd heard. The merger would bring thousands of new employees into a company built on fraudulent foundations, exponentially increasing the eventual fallout. In the elegant marble bathroom, I was surprised to find Lucy Chen, a junior accountant, dabbing at tearful eyes. She froze when she saw me. "I'm sorry," she mumbled quickly, gathering her things. "Just feeling a little unwell." "Lucy, is everything okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned by her distress. "It's nothing, just..." She hesitated, then whispered, "The Teleron numbers don't make sense. I've been working on merger projections all week, and something's very wrong with our reported assets, but no one will listen." She looked terrified at having said too much. "Please forget I said anything." She hurried out, leaving me with confirmation that others had noticed the discrepancies. When I returned to the table, the conversation had moved to expansion plans predicated on the merger. Marcus took a call during the dessert course, stepping outside the private room with a serious expression. Upon his return, he seemed slightly tense, but quickly resumed his genial host persona. It was during the coffee service that my phone vibrated in my bag. Discreetly checking it under the table, I saw a text from an unknown number. "Leave. Now. Don't tell anyone." My blood ran cold. Who sent this? Why was it a trap or a genuine warning? The message was so specific, so urgent, that it had to be connected to Horizon. I glanced around the table, but everyone was engaged in conversation. No one seemed to be watching for my reaction to a text they might have sent. After a moment's hesitation, I decided to trust my instincts. Something felt dangerously wrong. I waited 5 minutes, then placed my hand on my stomach with a slight grimace. When Janet asked if I was all right, I seized the opportunity. "I'm so sorry, but I suddenly don't feel well," I said, putting on a convincing performance of someone fighting nausea. "I think I should go home before it gets worse." Marcus frowned slightly but nodded. "Of course. These things happen. Allison can call you a car." "No need," I insisted, already gathering my things. "I drove here and the fresh air might help. Thank you for including me tonight." I managed to maintain a measured pace until I reached the parking lot, then practically ran to my car through the pouring rain. My hands shook so badly I could barely insert the key. As I pulled onto Lakeshore Drive, adrenaline coursed through my system. Had I just escaped something terrible or overreacted to a random text? 15 minutes later, my phone exploded with notifications. Breaking news alerts, text messages, missed calls. The headline that flashed across my screen made my heart stop. Federal agents raid Horizon Innovations headquarters in fraud investigation. I pulled over to the shoulder hazard lights, blinking as I scrolled through messages. According to early reports, FBI and SEC agents had executed a search warrant at Horizon's downtown offices and at the restaurant where the board dinner was taking place. Executives were being detained for questioning. Documents were being seized. Somehow, federal authorities had launched their investigation the exact night I happened to leave early because of a mysterious warning. This couldn't be coincidence. Someone had known what was coming and had chosen to warn me. But who and why me specifically? I sat in my car for nearly an hour, rain drumming on the roof, trying to process the seismic shift in my reality. Everything was collapsing. The career I'd built, the company I'd worked for, the security I'd counted on, all vanishing in a single night. As I finally drove home in a daze, one question kept circling in my mind. In the chaos that surely erupted after I left, who had the agents been looking for, and what would happen when they inevitably came looking for me? My phone rang constantly as I paced my apartment, watching live news coverage of the raid. Colleagues, friends, even my parents called after seeing Horizon's name splashed across headlines. I answered selectively, sharing only that I had left the dinner early and knew nothing about the investigation. The footage was dramatic. Federal agents in windbreakers, emblazoned with FBI, escorted handcuffed executives from the restaurant. Other teams carried boxes of documents from our headquarters. The company's stock had been halted in after-hours trading, pending further information. Social media exploded with speculation. Former employees shared stories of questionable practices they'd witnessed. Financial analysts who had questioned Horizon's too-perfect growth trajectory now claimed vindication. Current employees expressed shock and concern about their jobs and futures. Around midnight, details began emerging from reporters with sources inside law enforcement. The operation had apparently been planned for weeks, targeting specific executives including Marcus Derrick and 2 board members. The charges involved securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy related to falsified financial statements and misleading investors. What struck me most was the timing. The authorities had chosen to act precisely when all key players were gathered in one location away from headquarters where evidence might be destroyed. Someone with intimate knowledge of both the fraud and the investigation must have been involved. At 6:30 the next morning, my doorbell rang. 2 serious-faced agents, a man and a woman, stood in my hallway with FBI credentials. "Sierra Walker, we need to speak with you regarding Horizon Innovations." They were professional but firm, as they explained that I was not under arrest, but was required to answer questions as part of their investigation. They already knew I had left the dinner early and wanted to know why. I told them about the anonymous text showing them my phone as evidence. Their exchange of glances confirmed this was new information to them. "Miss Walker, we have reason to believe you may have information relevant to our investigation into financial fraud at Horizon," the female agent said. "We'd like you to come with us to answer some questions." At the federal building downtown, I was escorted to an interview room where a third person waited, introduced as a prosecutor from the Securities and Exchange Commission. For the next 4 hours, I answered detailed questions about Horizon's financial practices, the discrepancies I had discovered, and the behavior of various executives. When I revealed that I had been compiling evidence of the fraud, their demeanor changed noticeably. I provided access to my encrypted files and explained each document methodically. The SEC prosecutor seemed particularly impressed with the thoroughness of my documentation. "You've essentially done our preliminary investigation for us," she remarked. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" I explained my fears about retaliation and career destruction, the warnings I'd received, and the company's culture of silence. The agents exchanged knowing looks. "You should know that this investigation began 3 months ago based on information from another source," the male agent explained. "Your evidence corroborates what we've found and adds significant detail. Given the circumstances, you may qualify for whistleblower protections and potentially a reward under SEC programs." As our interview concluded, they informed me that Marcus and 5 other executives had been arrested on multiple federal charges. The board had called an emergency meeting to appoint interim leadership. Trading of Horizon stock would resume the next day, though analysts predicted a catastrophic drop. For your safety, we recommend minimal public comments about your role, the female agent advised. There may be people with a lot to lose who would blame you regardless of when you became involved. The gravity of the situation hit me as I left the federal building. Television news vans lined the street, reporters doing live updates with Horizon's logo displayed prominently. My ordinary life had been swept into an extraordinary legal and financial drama that would likely make national headlines for months. My phone showed dozens of missed calls, including several from journalists who had somehow obtained my number. Among them was a message from Thomas Wright, Horizon's head of legal. Please call me at this secure number as soon as possible. I can explain the text message. After consulting with the federal agents, I returned his call from their office. Thomas sounded exhausted, but relieved to hear from me. Are you safe, Sierra? I've been worried since everything erupted. I'm fine, I responded cautiously. The agent said, You want to explain something about the text message? He sighed heavily. Yes, I sent it. I've been cooperating with federal authorities for nearly 2 months, helping them build their case. When I learned they were planning to execute search warrants during the dinner, I knew you shouldn't be there. You're the only person besides Marcus who fully understood that whistleblower clause, and I couldn't let you get caught in the initial chaos. My mind raced, trying to process this revelation. Thomas, the quiet, precise head of legal, had been working with federal investigators all along. But why warn me specifically? I asked. Because I saw what you were doing, he explained. The system logs showed you accessing exactly the documents that revealed the fraud. Your search patterns matched someone methodically building a case. I recognized a fellow whistleblower. The conversation with Thomas revealed that the fraud was even more extensive than I had discovered. It spanned international jurisdictions, involved money laundering through shell companies, and implicated several board members who had profited enormously from artificially inflated stock prices. Over the following days, the story dominated financial news. Horizon's stock plummeted 80% when trading resumed. Shareholders filed class action lawsuits. Clients began terminating contracts. Employees gathered in stunned groups, wondering if their jobs would survive. I received a formal subpoena to testify before a grand jury, along with a letter confirming my protected status as a cooperating witness. Federal agents advised temporary protective custody after analyzing threatening messages posted on investment forums, blaming internal traders for the company's collapse. For 3 days, I stayed in a hotel under an assumed name, watching from a distance as the company I had helped build imploded under the weight of its deceptions. The facade of success that had dazzled Wall Street was crumbling, revealing the rot that had been growing beneath the surface for years. Through it all, I struggled with conflicting emotions: relief that the truth had emerged, guilt over colleagues losing jobs and investors losing savings, fear about my own future, and underneath it all, a growing sense that despite the personal cost, exposing the fraud had been the right thing to do. As federal prosecutors prepared their case, one critical question remained unanswered. How had the whistleblower clause that Marcus had insisted on, including in our contracts, ultimately contributed to his downfall? The answer would emerge in the most dramatic way possible during the preliminary court proceedings. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago buzzed with media activity on the morning of the preliminary hearing. Satellite trucks lined the street, reporters stationed at every entrance. I entered through a secure door, escorted by federal marshals to avoid the cameras. Inside the courtroom, I saw Marcus for the first time since the night of the raid. Once commanding and confident, he now looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, his normally perfect appearance disheveled. When our eyes met briefly, his flashed with unmistakable hatred. The prosecution's opening statement outlined a sophisticated fraud scheme spanning 5 years. Marcus and his co-conspirators had allegedly misrepresented financial data to inflate stock prices, secure favorable loans, and enrich themselves through performance bonuses and stock options. The total financial impact exceeded $200 million. When called to testify, I walked to the witness stand on shaky legs, painfully aware of all eyes following me. The prosecutor guided me through my discovery of the discrepancies, my attempts to report internally, and the evidence I had gathered. I spoke carefully, sticking to facts rather than speculation. During cross-examination, Marcus's high-powered defense attorney attempted to discredit me, suggesting I had misinterpreted normal accounting practices or was seeking revenge for being passed over for promotion. He implied I might have illegally accessed confidential documents beyond my authorization level. Miss Walker, isn't it true that you violated company policy by examining financial records outside your department? He asked, with practiced indignation. No, I responded firmly. My position required comprehensive analysis across departments. The fraud became apparent precisely because I was doing my job thoroughly. The attorney shifted tactics. And isn't it true that you had personal animosity toward Mr. Reynolds after he criticized your work last year? Before I could answer, Thomas Wright unexpectedly stood up from the prosecution table. Your Honor, I can provide context that directly refutes this line of questioning. The judge allowed Thomas to testify next. Dressed impeccably, as always, he projected calm authority as he explained his role as Horizon's legal counsel and his eventual decision to cooperate with authorities. I became suspicious when Marcus directed unusual changes to financial reporting procedures, Thomas explained. When I discreetly investigated, I found evidence of systematic fraud. As corporate counsel, I had a professional obligation to address wrongdoing. Then came the revelation that changed everything. Thomas described how he had personally drafted the whistleblower protection clause that appeared in all employee contracts, including mine. Marcus insisted on this clause, believing it would discourage whistleblowing by creating a complex internal reporting structure that his team controlled, Thomas explained. What he failed to understand was that I deliberately wrote the clause to exceed federal whistleblower protection standards, creating a legally binding commitment that would ultimately protect anyone who discovered the fraud. The courtroom fell silent as Thomas revealed the final piece of the puzzle. I sent the warning text to Sierra because I recognized she had independently discovered the fraud and was building her own case. The logs showed she was accessing exactly the documents that revealed the truth. I didn't want her caught in the initial raid because I knew she was a potential ally, not a co-conspirator. Marcus, who had been whispering intensely to his attorney, suddenly lost control. She had no right, he shouted, pointing at me. Who triggered this investigation? Who destroyed everything I built? Thomas answered calmly. The whistleblower clause you made her sign, Marcus. The very protection you thought would silence employees actually guaranteed their right to report fraud through appropriate channels. I made sure of that when I drafted it. The judge immediately called for order as Marcus was restrained by court officers. His outburst, witnessed by the full courtroom and later reported in every major financial publication, severely damaged his defense strategy of projecting calm innocence. As the preliminary hearings concluded, the prosecution had established sufficient evidence for the case to proceed to trial. Marcus and 3 other executives were denied bail due to flight risk, given their substantial offshore assets and the severity of the charges. In the days that followed, I received an unexpected email from the SEC's Whistleblower office. Although Thomas had been the first to report the fraud, my independent investigation and testimony had provided crucial evidence that strengthened the case. Under the SEC Whistleblower program, I qualified for a substantial reward once the case concluded with monetary penalties. The media narrative began shifting from scandal to accountability. Financial publications ran profiles of the analysts who spotted the fraud, highlighting both Thomas's legal expertise and my financial detective work. While some portrayed us as heroes, others used our story to emphasize systemic problems in corporate governance and the challenges whistleblowers face. 4 months later, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of decades in prison, Marcus accepted a plea deal. He would serve 12 years in federal prison, forfeit over $50 million in ill-gotten gains, and be permanently barred from serving as an officer or director of any public company. His co-conspirators received lesser but still significant sentences. At the sentencing hearing, the judge made a point of acknowledging Thomas and me. Corporate fraud of this magnitude requires not only perpetrators, but also an environment of fear and silence. We should commend those who risked their careers and personal safety to uphold the law when doing so carried significant personal cost. The recovered funds were directed toward restitution for shareholders and a fund for employees who lost jobs in the company's post-scandal restructuring. Though Horizon survived under new leadership and a different name, its workforce was reduced by nearly 60%. As for me, the experience transformed not just my career but my understanding of courage and integrity. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest, and that made all the difference. The months following the trial were both liberating and disorienting. Suddenly free from the pressure of secrecy and the fear of retaliation, I still had to rebuild a life fundamentally altered by my decision to stand up against corporate fraud. At Thomas's suggestion, I joined a support group for corporate whistleblowers, facilitated by the Government Accountability Project. Meeting others who had faced similar challenges provided immense comfort. There was Barbara, who had exposed safety violations at a pharmaceutical company, Michael, who reported defense contract fraud, and Elena, who revealed toxic waste dumping by her employer. Each story was unique, yet the emotional aftermath followed similar patterns: isolation, anxiety, uncertainty about the future, and the complex mix of pride and regret. The hardest part isn't the decision itself, Elena observed during one session. It's learning to live with the consequences when the adrenaline fades and you're left picking up the pieces. Her words resonated deeply with me. The initial validation from the successful prosecution had given way to quieter challenges. Former colleagues avoided me, unsure whether to treat me as a hero or a traitor. Job interviews would progress well until my involvement in the Horizon case inevitably came up. Financial security remained elusive, despite the promised SEC reward, which was tied up in ongoing appeals. My professional identity, once so clearly defined by my finance career, required reinvention. With Thomas's encouragement, I began consulting with law firms specializing in corporate compliance, providing insights into how fraud manifests in financial reporting. My first-hand experience proved valuable in training internal auditors to recognize red flags similar to those I had spotted at Horizon. 6 months after the sentencing, I received an unexpected call from Blair Henderson, CEO of Integrity Partners, a mid-sized financial services firm known for its ethical business practices. "I've been following your story with interest," she said, after introducing herself. "We're establishing a new corporate ethics division focused on creating meaningful safeguards rather than checkbox compliance. Would you be interested in helping build it?" The offer represented more than employment. It was a chance to transform a painful experience into something constructive. At Integrity Partners, I helped develop whistleblower protection programs that provided genuine security for employees who identified wrongdoing. We created training that emphasized ethical decision-making rather than just legal compliance. Working with Thomas, who had established his own corporate governance consultancy, I spoke at industry conferences about the Horizon case. We used our experience to advocate for regulatory reforms and stronger protections for those who reported corporate malfeasance. Gradually, I reconnected with former Horizon colleagues who had found new positions after the company's implosion. Many expressed admiration for my courage, though some admitted they weren't sure they would have done the same in my position. "I saw the same numbers you did," admitted Rachel, a former accounting manager now working at a regional bank. "I just convinced myself there must be explanations I wasn't privy to. It was easier than confronting the truth." That kind of honesty helped me understand the powerful social and psychological forces that enable corporate fraud to flourish. Fear compartmentalization, diffusion of responsibility, and the natural human tendency to avoid conflict all create environments where wrongdoing can go unchallenged. Using part of my SEC award when it finally arrived, I established a scholarship for ethics in business at my alma mater. The annual award supported students who demonstrated commitment to ethical leadership and transparency in business practices. The personal growth that emerged from the experience was perhaps its most unexpected outcome. I developed resilience I never knew I possessed. My definition of success shifted from external validation and financial rewards to alignment with personal values and integrity. The anxiety and nightmares that had plagued me gradually subsided as I integrated the experience into my life story rather than allowing it to define me. 3 years after the Horizon case concluded, I was invited to speak at a national conference on corporate ethics. As I looked out at the audience of business leaders, compliance officers, and government regulators, I shared the most important lesson I had learned. The systems designed to silence truth-tellers often contain the very protections that ultimately allow the truth to emerge. Marcus Reynolds believed his whistleblower clause would create an illusion of transparency while actually suppressing reports of wrongdoing. Instead, it became the legal framework that protected those who exposed his fraud. There's a powerful metaphor in that. Sometimes our greatest protection comes from the very mechanisms intended to control us if we have the courage to use them as they should be used, not as they were intended. Today, as I continue my work in corporate ethics, I often think about that text message that changed everything. Leave. Now. Don't tell anyone. Sometimes the most important decisions in our lives arrive in unexpected moments requiring immediate action based on incomplete information. The path of integrity rarely comes with perfect clarity or certainty. Instead, it demands we listen to that quiet inner voice that recognizes truth, even when speaking it comes at great personal cost. What would you do if you discovered wrongdoing in your workplace? Would you have the courage to stand up for what's right, even if it meant risking everything you've worked for? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you found my story valuable. Your support helps these important conversations about ethics and integrity reach more people. Thank you for listening to my journey from whistleblower to advocate and remember that in the world of corporate ethics, one person with courage can make all the difference.